My late father was a stutterer. I was really glad when the movie The King's Speech drew some popular attention to the fact that this particular speech impediment, though often portrayed comically on television, is not a laughing matter. I've been told that my dad stuttered a little bit when he was young, but after an apparent nightmarish experience in World War II, the problem became quite profound. My father's PTSD, at the time they called it battle fatigue, but post-traumatic stress syndrome, was so bad that when the war was over, he was brought home and put into a mental hospital. He got better, but he was always nervous. My childhood was marked with his night terrors and screams and his occasional violent outbursts. He was, for his entire life, a fairly unhappy man, given to episodic overreaction to minor events and occasional completely out-of-control incidents in the punishment of his own children, enough so that the four of us would have been placed in foster care if such a thing had been available in those days. When he was upset about something and wanted to give my siblings and me a patriarchal lecture, he would begin to stutter. And there were two things that could make him give up on a lecture and just commence with the corporal punishment. The worst would be if you dared to crack a smile or laugh at his stuttering. The second would be if you tried to say the word that he was stuck on for him. So there were occasions when the four of us were seated in the family room with our red-faced father standing before us on the verge of an explosion, yet entirely frozen in time. These very uncomfortable family moments didn't happen often, but they didn't have to happen very often because none of us ever forgot them. And none of us ever wanted to be the cause of the next one. There are better ways to inspire your children to make good grades, to clean their rooms, to show respect to their mother, to do their chores, and to sit quietly in church. But this is the way it was done in my family. Now, if your father or mother becomes your first image of what God is like, if our theistic parent is based on our actual biological parent, but just bigger and lives in the clouds and is a constant source of threat of punishment, while always also being the sole provider of food and housing and health and every other good thing, then you can see how I was prepared by my childhood to completely accept the traditional view of God in the Christian religion. Traditional Christianity gives us a God who will, in the name of both love and justice, kill his own son in the most torturous and horrible way. We were taught to believe in a God who was generally distant, but constantly very demanding. And though we were given an alleged book of directions about how to stay out of trouble, some of the stories in that book just made that father figure seem kind of crazy. On the one hand, having lots of wives is a sign of blessing. Read on a few pages and you discover that having more than one will send you into hell for eternity. This whole business is supposed to be about love and compassion, and yet there are stories of incest, human sacrifice, warfare, land theft, and even directions on how to sell your own children into slavery. We were given, in a way, a rather angry and, may I say, a stuttering God who was hard to understand, difficult to make happy, and not, if I may say it just this way, entirely rational. As Jack Nelson Pallmeyer said in his book, Jesus Against Christianity, most of the Hebrew Bible describes God as being a kind of pathological land thief. There are aspects of the image of God that was given to us through traditional Sunday school that any reasonable review would tell you that God was neurotic. As Scott Peck said in his famous book, The Road Less Traveled, the Catholic Church is what kept him in business in private practice psychiatry. And he acknowledged that he simply lived in a heavily Catholic part of the country. Around here, you have to say, do you know there's twice as many licensed psychologists and therapists in Springfield as there are in either Kansas City or St. Louis? And can you deny that having the headquarters of the Assemblies of God in Springfield is a part of why we need so much therapy to live in this city? My older brother, who also eventually became a pastor, usually tried to make excuses for our dad, though I suspect that as the firstborn, he probably actually suffered the most from Dad's unrealistic expectations and sometimes rather cruel enforcement techniques. He did, however, make the poignant observation that our childhoods were among the uncounted casualties of World War II. Not that you can lay all the blame for some really bad parenting decisions at the feet of a bad war experience, but it isn't hard to see the causal link. Something happened to him that was so traumatic that he did not evolve past World War II. He did not shed a tear on the occasion of the death of his own granddaughter or even on the death of his own daughter. But when he was 91 years old, my last visit with him, he was still weeping in grief for the loss of his company that he served with in the South Pacific. Whatever happened to him of importance happened to him before he was 25 years old, and even the birth of his own 4 children did not crack that reality. There were so many obvious deficiencies in my family of origin that it was fairly easy for me to know what I wanted to do differently when it became my turn to be a father. But as a father, I quickly discovered that the flaws that were a part of my family of origin were not the majority of my childhood experience. There were also things to pass along that were family treasures that I could see were absent from many other young people. In a conversation with an adult friend who had a pretty bad upbringing, I was explaining to him, while my parents were deficient in any number of parenting skills, we lived in a clean house, we had 3 meals a day, we wore clean clothes, we went to school, we were encouraged to go to college, we were taken to church every Sunday, we were taken to Boy Scout meetings. And my friend said, yeah, those were the things my parents didn't do. So even recognizing the deficits of my own childhood, I recognized, more importantly, when I became a father, that there were really crucial things that I did inherit that I needed to make sure that I passed along. The most elementary form of religion places a harsh, stuttering father in the clouds that we were taught to be afraid of. It wasn't healthy, but even still, there may have been some laudable goals behind even that mistaken theology. There are things about our religious heritage that we do not want to leave behind, but we would not be very wise if we didn't recognize that there were some valuable lessons that are important for us to not abandon. It's easy for us to denigrate our early religious experience and just dismiss it. But I think rationally, as progressive people, we need to also recognize that we learned some important lessons in that context that we really don't want to let go of. I tried hard as a father to make my daughter know and feel every day that she is important, valuable, loved, and deserved to be treated with honor and respect by everyone she meets, especially that tall boyfriend of hers. But I also taught her to clean her room, to work hard to get good grades, to be honest, to be fair, to be kind to people, and to especially work hard to be kind to people who didn't deserve it. There were times when our conversations were serious. She may have even wished that I had a speech impediment, because there were times that I strived to be so clear in my moral instructions that I'm sure that it seemed like it went on way too long. I tend to want to be very, very clear when I'm talking to her. He didn't go about it in a brilliant way, but my father wanted his children to be honest, hardworking, responsible, and self-reliant people of character. The churches that many of us grew up in also tried to teach us to be decent people. Admittedly, they often used threats, and they used promises of rewards that were not real and were less healthy. They weren't always honest, but when you pull back the curtain, when you're no longer afraid of the great and powerful Oz, you find a little flawed chap who's not entirely a fraud. He really did want to be helpful. The lectionary reading from the Hebrew Bible today is a kind of holiness code from one of those books of the Old Testament that if we were getting together today to edit a Bible, we probably wouldn't include Leviticus in it, because some of the craziest stuff in the Bible is in Leviticus. Some of the most whacked out examples of how to sell your daughter into slavery and all kinds of dietary issues and stuff that are just too crazy to be repeated are in Leviticus. And yet this holiness code we look at today is also there. And it starts off by telling people in an agrarian society, don't harvest all the wheat in your field. Leave the corners. And the wheat that falls while you're cutting it, you leave that right there. Because there are poor people, there are illegal immigrants among you that will need to pick that food up. When you're gathering the grapes from your vineyard, don't get them all. And the ones that fall on the ground, just assume those weren't for you. Leave those behind for people in need. Now, we're very far removed from that kind of agricultural life, and yet it isn't hard for us to know what this text is teaching us. There's no stuttering here. It's pretty clear that those of us that have assets, that have a decent living, must live in a way that is aware of the people around us who don't have a decent living, who don't have enough to eat. It asks us not to be so self-centered, not to be so hard-hearted that we're not ready to share with the people who are in need. The passage continues to say, you shall not steal, you shall not deal falsely, you won't lie about each other, you will not keep for yourself the wages that you owe your laborer. I want to talk about minimum wage, but not today. This code also says you can't make fun of people for being deaf. You can't put a stumbling block in front of someone who's blind. You cannot render an unjust judgment. You shall not be partial either to the poor or to the rich, but you will judge in honesty and fairness. You will not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you can't get a profit by buying stock in Halliburton and Morton Thiokol and making money off of bloodshed. You shall not hate anyone in your heart, not even one of your kin, and they deserve it. You shall not seek revenge or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, I'm afraid that too often we enjoy repeating to one another how far we have come from our neurotic religious past, that we have rejected the inheritance of our religious beginnings that were uninformed, magical, superstitious, something that we want to get rid of. And yet, I want to remind everyone today, remind myself, that even though the medium of the message was pretty messed up, the desire to be a decent person of character is not something we want to turn our backs on. Sure, you want to remove both the carrot and the stick of outrageous religious promises and irrational religious threats, but we still want to be the kind of people who will share our food with the poor. We don't want to slander our neighbors. We don't want to give up on the all-too-human desire for revenge and to choose then to be the kind of people who lay aside our grudges. We don't want to be guilty of finding ways of withholding workers' wages or passively allowing the rich to control our judicial system or even allowing the poor to scam the welfare system. I rejected fear-based parenting, but I didn't reject the values of parenting to create a person of good character. We have let go of a lot of neurotic religious history. But come on, folks, you watch the news. You have to know that we cannot afford to abandon our faith as a source of moral instruction. The world is not governed by people of good character. I don't need to change my last name to be different as a father from the way my father was. I just need to wear that name differently. We don't have to abandon Christianity to get past the magic and the superstition. We just have to wear that name and bear the tradition in a more healthy way. Amen.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.